Theater Talk is made possible in part by the CUNY TV Foundation. This is Theater Talk. I'm Susan Haskins.
And I'm Michael Riedel of the New York Post.
We've reached the end of another season on Broadway.
And on the eve of this year's Tony Awards, we're going to look back on the Broadway season with many of our favorite critics, pundits, and reporters who are going to tell us what they enjoyed this past year on Broadway.
So welcome to Theater Talk's Tony Cavalcade. Here we go.
I'm a drug addict. I'm addicted to drugs, pills, especially downers. You see these little blue babies? These are my best fucking friends, and they never let me down. You try to get them away from me, and I'll eat you alive. Give me those goddamn drugs.
August Osage County very nearly lives up to the hype. It's a lot of hype at this point. I mean, it's won everything that you can win. The acting has been praised, and the writing has been praised, and the fact that the fact that it even exists, I think, is an achievement. It's a 3.5-hour drama. Set in Middle America. It's full of scandalous soap opera touches, fine. But there again, this is hooking us back into an old tradition. I mean, this is, I've complained about it sometimes, but the fact is, this is what American drama is. There's a huge streak of it right down the middle of American theater history, of these sort of complicated family dramas from O'Neill down.
It pays homage to a lot of the, classic dramas of the American theater.
Like Long Day's Journey into Night.
Yeah, you can see echoes of that, and Lillian Hellman, and Edward Albee even. And he infuses it with this wonderful pop sensibility,
Tracy
Letts. Tracy Letts, so that sort of keeps going, and ratcheting up the intensity all through the play.
I read in the New York Times, though, that this is one of the great family plays in the tradition of O'Neill's Long Day's Journey into Night.
Well, it's wrong to say that. It's wrong, really, to compare it to Long Day's Journey into Night simply because it's long. It doesn't mean that Letts is O'Neill. What Charles Isherwood said was, this is a wonderful play. It's just like watching TV. That's what he said.
And is he right?
Well, why would you, what does he mean it's just like watching TV? You go to the theatre precisely because you don't want to watch TV.
The point of my, bringing up the comparison to TV is that I think what's special about this play is that a lot of people think Broadway is something where you go see, very worthy things from London that make you feel like you've done something culturally significant, and even though you're checking your watch halfway through. I wanted to make the point that this is a show that really is going to have a broad appeal to people who necessarily, might not necessarily go to the theater more than once or twice a year to go see some splashy bad musical, and that it might sort of reignite people's interest in, American theater.
Look, if it's not incest, it's pedophilia. If it's not pedophilia, it's alcoholism. If it's not that, it's drugs. If it's not that, it's suicide. If it's not that, it's divorce.
It's all in there.
It's all in there.
That's why it's 3.5 hours.
There's something for everyone right there in the play itself. And it's very popular with people, and they probably go home and they say, it was just like watching television.
I do not believe you. Sitting here watching the baseball game, drinking beers. Don't you have any sense of what's going on around you? This situation is fraught.
I'm supposed to sit here like a statue? You're drinking whiskey.
I'm having a cocktail.
You're drinking straight whiskey.
Just show a little class.
Patti LuPone and Gypsy is a throwback to the old days. I mean, this is a performance that you can compare to Merman at her prime, Mary Martin, Carol Channing. She is in that great line of Broadway divas, and she really delivers.
Some people can get a thrill.
Can we give some credit to Arthur Lawrence, who at 89 years old has directed the hell out of this musical that he wrote?
Absolutely. Arthur Lawrence's direction of Gypsy is amazing. One of the great things about this show is that both Lawrence and Patti love to rehearse. And it pays off in this show. You can see them both reworking and deepening the show and her performance.
It's astonishing. And she knocks herself out. And I will say that if a strange thing happens and she doesn't win the Tony Award this year, I mean, I do really think it's a lock. I mean, if she doesn't, all I can say is I think that Patti LuPone will find out who did not vote for her, and she will track them down, and she will kill them. Possibly from spitting nails from all the scenery she's been chewing.
Oh my God, I loved South Pacific, and I didn't really know I loved South Pacific. Why? Because this is one of these shows that you see in church basements. And so I thought really that South Pacific was going to be kind of square and wonderful in its old-fashioned way. And I was totally knocked out by it. Bartlett Shear's production, while it celebrates the joy of the musical, it's also a very serious piece of work there's this darker subtext that these people are going off to war.
Rodgers and Hammerstein at their best 60 years later is still as good as anybody's ever going to get at the heart and the truth of what they do, and I just think it's one of the most exquisite things I've ever seen.
One girl for my dream, one partner in paradise.
One of the revelations of the season was Polo Shot in South Pacific. Now here you've got a rising young star. He's not that big, wasn't that big.
An opera star.
An opera star, a baritone. Apparently, from what I understand, they had asked a lot of rising baritones, and baritones who had already risen to the top and who did not want to do 8 performances. And then they found this wonderful Polo Shot, who has incredible on-stage chemistry with Kelly O'Hara.
When you find your true love.
Kelly O'Hara is giving a magnificent, glowing, absolutely captivating, even sexy performance. She is so honest and innocent, and of course, vocally outstanding.
I'm in love, I'm in love, I'm in love, I'm in love, I'm in love with a wonderful guy.
Finishing the hat. How you have to finish the hat. How you watch the rest of the world from our window while you finish the hat.
Sunday in the Park with George, I got to tell you, I liked it better than the original production, because I think most people agreed that after that riveting first act, the second act was sort of, sort of a collapse. Yeah. And I think in this production, he's got a really fascinating narrative about the art world today and what keeps it going and how it has changed. But I found it a very moving play.
Anything you do, let it come from you. Then it will be new. Give us some more to see.
With Sondheim, leave the handkerchiefs at home because he cannot touch his emotions. Well, all of a sudden, I was immensely moved by this show. And those visuals are magnificent. And
the video projections.
They're beautiful. They don't take over the production, but they enhance the production enormously.
Sunday in the Park with George is a very, very fine piece of work as a revival.
You have a mission to see. Now I have one too, George, and we should have belonged together. We go together like friend, like friend.
Grease.
I have the feeling that every generation gets the grease it deserves.
People like what they already know, and that's what that is. And if they want to see it, if they want to spend that money to see this nice boy and this nice girl who won, what did they win? And that's fine.
The leads of Grease were chosen on a reality show by the American public. Last time we let the public decide on something, we ended up with President Bush. Though actually they stole that election, so that's not a fair analogy. But you cannot leave Broadway decisions, and a whole night of my life basically ripped from me because the American public picked these two people.
What do you make of this whole idea of casting shows based on American Idol type television shows?
Depressing. It's a depressing idea to vote on people. I'd rather be surprised and have, you know, someone come out of nowhere.
Grease.
Yes. I've got nothing to say about Greece.
Greece is hugely important to no one really in particular, I don't think.
It's a lovely country. I am one of very few critics who really liked Grease.
Oh, I'm shocked.
Well, you know what? I saw
this production?
Yes. But you know what? I voted for Max and Laura. I think they're very likable. And I think that the whole idea of this revival is seeing these characters, Danny and Sandy, as innocent kids. We've really moved away from that ever since the movie, which was all sexed up discotheque. Look at Olivia Newton-John and John Travolta, and they're carrying the show. This is going back to those roots. One moment I adored in the new version is how they added in the song Hopelessly Devoted to You. In the movie, she is singing it right after Look at Me, I'm Sandra Dee. Yeah. It doesn't belong really in the film. It doesn't really admit Sandy's emotions at that point. But here she sings it right after the dance. She sees Danny coming out of it with that other girl, Cha-Cha, and now she sings it. And it makes sense, and it worked brilliantly. And I'm not saying that Grease is better than South Pacific or Sunday or Gypsy. And you know what?
Or Xanadu, or Pirate Queen,
that's a
or
different...
Carrie, but yeah, they're...
Yeah.
Matt Women, it's a minority opinion. And it's
deep in the minority.
In the Heights, I buy my coffee and I go. I buy my coffee and set my sights on only what I need to know. What I need to know.
In the Heights, a musical that's breaking new ground?
Right. Well, it's doing In the Heights is doing two things. It is breaking new ground. It's bringing music to Broadway that we haven't heard on Broadway before, salsa and hip hop. And it's doing something that's very old. It's connecting Broadway back to the old tradition of immigrants coming here and bringing their original sounds and combining them with other sounds, and you end up with something that's completely new.
So in a way, In the Heights is what Irving Berlin was doing back in 1920 when he was writing the influences of Russian folk music that flecked its way into his kind of music.
Absolutely. Russian folk music by way of salsa dancing. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Is it breaking new ground, though, for the Broadway musical?
Well, what's the last Latino show we've had on Broadway?
West Side Story in 1952.
Okay,
or
what's the last Latino show we've had on Broadway? That was written by a bunch of white guys, and this was written by a 28-year-old. And just the sounds are different. The sound of the score is really completely different than I think anything any of us have heard in a Broadway theater.
In the Heights, I hang my flag upon display. We came to work and to live, and we got a lot in common. It reminds me that I came from miles away.
I liked Xanadu. It was like the little show that could. Parts of it were like maybe a Broadway Easter bonnet competition sketch taken to an extreme, and yet it was adorable. It was charming. It was well cast.
Do you think it's largely because of Douglas Carter Beane, the book writer, that he got the right sort of tone for that show?
Douglas Carter Beane spiced up the script of this Olivia Neutron bomb from the late 70s and made it kind of a wink-wink, cute show that's supposed to be funny, not because it's bad. It was mocking the conventions of theater and bad theater as it was embracing them. Not every musical has to push the form into a new direction. Most of the musicals that did that, by the way, were written 50 years ago, Gypsy and South Pacific. So now we're like, oh, look at these inventive musicals. Yeah, but they're old. Passing Strange does reinvent the form in a way because it's not a musical, it's just kind of a rock concert that tells a story, and it's very clever.
Passing Strange I thought was terrific. I thought it was original. It taught me things that I hadn't sort of thought about before. I thought it was sexy. I thought it was funny. I thought the score was great, the book was great, and the performances were absolutely spot on.
I don't think it's unusual at all that Passing Strange is on Broadway.
Why?
I think it's inevitable. I think it represents more than anything else that's been on Broadway in the last, I don't know, 5 years. More than Spring Awakening, more than any show that's been seen as like this transitional force for Broadway, something big and uplifting for the youth who are going to the theater. There's an experience seeing that show that's like no other show out there, and it's like getting hit with a wall of sound. And every hair on your body crackles and it stands up, and it really, I don't know why anybody would say it's a passing moment. It's something that stays with you long after the show ends.
I'm glad, personally, that Crybaby got this 4th slot in the Tony nominations. Because of the possible musicals that could have taken that slot, it is the only one that I would go back and see.
What about the score by these 2 young kids, one from the Fountains
Yeah,
of
Adam
Wayne,
Schlesinger and David Javerbaum.
who writes The Daily Show. Is this a good way for the musical theater to go, to draw on these kind of writers to do this kind of score?
I think it's a great thing that they brought in these particular writers, and David Javerbaum is a brilliant lyricist, which you sometimes hear in this score. Adam Schlesinger is a talented composer, and the dancing is really first-rate. I think that some of the musical numbers in this show rank with the best musical numbers that we've seen in the past 10 years.
Choreography is by
Rob Ashford, who is nominated, and I think has a good shot at winning. Rob's work here is absolute top-drawer award.
Immediate family. Those folks you sometimes hate, but have to suck it up and tolerate.
Catered Affair is probably the best Broadway musical of the season. It's subtle. And, you know, Broadway doesn't do subtle very easily. I mean, it has to be big, it has to be broad, and also I think it's one of the faults of the audience. Not that, you know, you can't blame the audience if the show is bad, but you really have to pay attention, and audiences aren't used to doing that anymore.
Does it seem more like a play with music than a musical to you, or do you think it is in the tradition of a musical?
I think it is in the tradition of a musical, because when the characters reach a point where they have nothing else to say, they sing.
Yeah.
And even though the songs are very quiet, they're really in their own way very emotionally explosive.
This is what getting married should be.
The engine of our economy is a strong one. That's why we have unparalleled and unequal strength in this great country. But sacrifices must be made.
The Adding Machine is quite a wonderful musical. The fact that it's based on an old play, why not? And the play itself wasn't bad, God knows. It sort of has a kind of operatic sound to it, the music, without being actually operatic. It sort of relates to serious music, but it still stays within the Broadway musical perimeters.
Though it's based on an Elmer Rice play from the 1920s, I
Yes.
believe. What's the resonance today?
Well, the resonance is that there are always little people who trudge through life, who slave through life, who have no imagination, who do some menial job and think that's all there is to life, and who, when they suddenly are shown in some kind of an afterlife what they missed, can't even appreciate that. And even in the afterlife, they want to go back to totting up numbers on an adding machine, because to them that's all there is.
Yeah, sad.
So it shows that the human being is even incapable of imagining something better than the chunk that he is saddled with.
What was so great about the Adding Machine?
Because it lasts 90 minutes, the curtain goes up, and you are thrust into a world that could only belong in theatre, because all its choices are clear and honest and true.
Will all great Neptune's ocean wash this blood clean from my hand?
I liked Patrick Stewart in Macbeth much better than on Star Trek.
yes.
And the production is kind of a love-hate. I loved it. It has a concept, and it goes with it.
What
to
is
the
that
extreme.
concept?
The concept is to approach Shakespeare as if it were a Saw sequel or Hostel 3. It really goes for slasher movie conventions,
Right.
and really spruces it up because of the invention, the gimmicks that works. And Patrick Stewart is fine because amidst all the gimmickry, he's giving a subtle performance.
And mock the time with fairest show. False face must hide what the false heart doth know.
Gretchen, you're German. Have you forgotten about her? Of course I haven't forgotten. She's not coming until 11 o'clock. Oh, that's what you think, is it? Don't you remember she called to say she was going to be late? And after you went out, she called back to say she'd be early. Really? How early? How early? She's here. In the there. Oh, my God.
boing, boing. I loved it. I loved it. It's just, you know, silly. It's from another era completely, the early 60s, the golden age of air travel, right?
Yeah,
And you have
that's
these
true.
3 stewardesses in uniforms that are 3 sizes too small, and they are just exploding out of them. I think the director, Matthew Walsh, has made sure they exploded out of these things. And, you know, it's about one guy who's got this apartment in Paris, and he's used to having one come through at a time, and all of a sudden all 3 come through. Fado-farce, of course it is. Pre-feminist, of course it is. But it's great fun.
Boing, Boing. I'll tell you, I haven't had an experience in the Martian syndrome area like that since the days that I used to have to go to dinner theater sex farces. You know, that Don Knotts in the man with the mind with the dirty man. This is the kind of stuff I used to have to do, and this is just in the genre.
All right, but wait, Lynn, I have to ask you.
Yes.
Many of your colleagues, particularly your male colleagues,
all my
think
colleagues
this
are
is
male.
They think, right, fair enough. They think this is one of the funniest farces in the English language.
Yeah, well, I'm not totally convinced that this is a male-female problem with Boing Boing. I think it's you like stupid comedy or you don't like stupid comedy. You like hit 'em with the beanbag chair, School of Humor, or you don't.
Is it a sexist play, though?
Well, it is a sexist play, but it's a sexist play in 1960s bimbo genre of sexism.
So don't we have to accept it of its time?
Well, I would accept it of its time if it had a bit of wit in it, if it had anything that I hadn't seen before, if people were not just mugging and falling on the ground and hollering.
Anyone can do anything if they've got what it takes. And if they haven't? Well, if they're stupid or lazy or frightened, I'm not going to help them get a job.
I did like Top Girls very much. We see all these women throughout history and all the things they had to sacrifice along the way. And it's hard being a woman, and that's nothing really new there, but sometimes we need a little reminding.
The production in general is terrific, and I'm rather surprised that James MacDonald, who directed it, did not get nominated for a Tony. It's a beautifully shaped, beautifully orchestrated production. It's like a piece of music. You don't get it by listening to the exact words. You get it by listening to the sense the flood of words makes from the characters' emotions. That's the fascinating thing about it.
Carol Churchill happens to be, in my view, the greatest living playwright in England. And if you think of that extraordinary opening scene,
the dinner party with all of the women from history.
Yes, it's a wonderfully performed production, by the way. But it wasn't nominated, was it?
No.
So there you are. It hasn't been nominated. The best play revival on Broadway has not been nominated.
So let's close now with Stu, accompanied by Heidi Rodewald, performing Work the Wound from their Tony-nominated musical, Passing Strange.
Every day I build a mask, up to the task. Another song you see. La 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 la. I live behind the rhyme and verse. I lift my voice till I lift the curse. It's all rehearsed, you see.